all major browsers have some way to report JavaScript errors. However, by default, these browsers hide this information because it is usually only of use to developers, or because by its nature, web pages can throw errors during normal operation. The common place that all major browsers expose JavaScript errors is on the console. Unless you are looking for them, they can be easily missed. Now, no one doubts the importance of error handling. In fact, on the server side of coding, a good error handling procedure is common practice. In this section, we're going to talk about JavaScript errors, how to handle those errors effectively, and some error handling strategies. Before we address dealing with errors, I think it is important to understand what a JavaScript error really is. So let's take a look at that first by looking at some sample code. All right, so I've declared two functions here, first word and last word. And basically what happens with these two functions, a string is passed in, and the first word function returns the first word of that string. The last word function returns the last word of that string. We're just using a split method on the string to divide it into individual words. And then here we return 0, the 0 position, which is going to be the first string. Here we return the length of that array that's created by split minus 1. That's going to be the last word in the string. Now notice that when we call first word, it also calls last word. It passes in the string, calls last word. We log that to the console. Down here we call both of them, console.log first word, console.log last word. And we're passing in this string right here. So if we were to take a look at what we get, we're basically getting critical as the last word, error is the first word, critical is the last word. So we can walk through that. We call first word, but that, the very first thing it does is call last word, and so we get critical. That's the last word there. And then we get the first word because the first word function returns that. And then once again, we call the last word again. All right, so that is functioning normally. Our code is functioning normally. We're not getting any errors in there. So now let's add an error condition. Let's say that we wanted to retrieve a new string, and we have a comm module, communication module, and this allows us to get a string. Now, usually this works, but occasionally there may be situations where it can't be found and we get an error. So what would that look like? Well, you're all aware what it's going to look like. You've seen errors before. That's not mysterious. We want to talk about what it is, though. So here we have an uncaught reference there. Comm is not defined. And then we have a stack trace. It tells us where the error occurred inside of the first word function, and it gives us the line number there. And then inside of this JavaScript file, this was where we began the execution. So this is the first thing, and then inside that function is where we get the error. Now, something to be aware of is this could be replaced with us creating an error. We could do that on our own. So let me go ahead and I'm going to remove this line. Well, let me just comment it out so it stays here in the file. And then down below it, I'm going to do new error. That's the constructor for creating an error object, and comm is not defined. That's the same message we received from the actual error. So let's go ahead and save that and see what happens. Well, as we can see, it didn't interrupt the execution of the code. Before, when we got an error, it interrupted the execution, right where the error occurred. Nothing else occurred after that. That was the last thing that happened. It stopped the execution of all the code in this file here that we started running. But creating a new error object doesn't do that. So what is that? What did we just do there? Well, let's take a look at this at the console. I'm going to assign this to variable e here, and we'll just do the same message again like this. Now, if I display e, we can see that it looks like an error. It displays like an error, but it's not in red. It's not stopping the execution of anything. I could go something like this, whoops, and then do a line right after it, and it doesn't stop it. It allows it to add those two fours together, and so we're not really stopping anything. Now, we'll address that in just a second, but first let me talk a little bit more about this error object. This is an error object, and it has properties. For example, a common property of an error object is the message. Right there, comma is not defined. It also has a name, and that is just the type of error it is. Now, both of these properties are common among all browsers. There are specific browser properties as well, which may apply to a specific, for example, in some browsers, there's a stack property, which actually gives us a stack trace of where the error occurred. Now, we know this is an object because I can go ahead and add my own property to it. Say I wanted to identify who had written this or created this error object. Well, I've just added that property. Now, when I take a look at written by, whoops, it will display it back to me. So we see that what we've created here is just an object. It's a special object for errors. It defines an error. But let's jump back to the part about how we use this error to interrupt the program. That happens with a regular error. Well, in order for that to happen with an error that we've created, we have to throw the error. So let's jump back here to this code. And I'm going to go ahead and assign this to a variable. Let e equal new error. Com is not defined, just like that. And I will assign my own property to it, just to see we can do that. Put my name in there. And then what we want to do when we want an error to interrupt is we need to throw it. The throw command will cause the interruption of the code. So if I throw that error E like that, let's look at what's going to happen. I save that. And as we can see, uncaught error, comma is not defined. It looks very similar to the error that was created when we tried to call com, and it indicated that it was not defined. Looks very similar to that. The one difference is that was a reference error. Here we just have a general error. That is the name of ours, is just a general error. Well, there are constructor functions for different types of errors as well. For example, we could simply change this to reference error. Save that. Now we have a reference error. Another one is syntax. We could change that to syntax, and it would be a syntax error. Oops, uppercase S. And then we get a syntax error. There's a total of 8 additional constructor functions for creating errors, which you can look into. If you just do a Google search on error constructors in JavaScript, you'll find them. They're eval error, range error, reference error, syntax error, type error, URI error, aggregate error, and internal error. Those are the other ones that are available. Now, those are not the important things about handling errors. Yes, it is good to know that you can throw your own errors, and there are situations where you want to do that, which we will talk about. But what we really want to do, now that we've talked about errors, we've looked at how they are objects, and we've looked that we can create our own and then throw them to create our own errors and to stop the execution of the program. What we really want to know now is how to handle those errors. So let's start looking at that next.